I'm Alexa. At the beginning of the pandemic, during a time when peer connections were extremely difficult for many, I was fortunate enough to discover a community of like-minded youth who not only helped me feel comfortable in such a chaotic time, but helped me grow as a learner and as a contributor to society. But before I continue my talk, I just would like to make sure the audience is acquainted with a few terms that I think would help better enhance the comprehension of my talk today. So just by a quick show of hands, who here is comfortable with any of these terms? BIPOC, climate justice, and equity. Awesome. Okay, yeah, that makes me really excited. If you're not, that is completely okay. At one point, I had no idea what any of these terms meant. BIPOC is a more contemporary version of the term POC, which stands for person or people of color. It specifically means Black, Indigenous people of color. It's not one specific group, rather just a larger non-white population. And it really stands to emphasize the specific and extremely unique histories of Black and Indigenous populations. Climate justice is the intersecting points of various kinds of justices, really in the face of the climate crisis. These issues are being rather highlighted by the impending effects of the climate crisis, concerning different justices like economic justice, social justice, and ecological justice. And then it is also the goal of many, if not all, climate activists. And my final term is equity. I like to think of equity as like the hot cousin of equality, just because it's a little bit more like, I like you. Equity is the understanding that specific populations need specific resources due to just their pure existence. You might need one pair of hiking boots to get to the peak of the mountain based on your experiences, but someone else might need 2 pairs based on theirs. And that's really the essence of equity. And equality and equity, both great things, but when we're looking at long-term solutions, we want to prioritize equity, especially when it concerns vulnerable communities. So now that we're acquainted with those terms, if not already, I can continue with my talk. As I was mentioning, at the beginning of the pandemic, I found a community that really made me feel seen. I started off as an initial group of youth volunteers at a local environmental nonprofit, as BB mentioned earlier, called San Diego 350. San Diego 350 is a grassroots campaign whose goal is to see an end to the climate crisis, especially concerning very vulnerable communities, the same communities that we here today find ourselves in. I started off helping produce a virtual summer camp. Now, during the pandemic, it was hard, obviously, to group together youth to just participate in anything. Our attention spans were weakening, we felt disconnected, and with so many events happening around us, like the Black Lives Matter protests, it was kind of impossible to not pay attention to everything else. And so the purpose of the virtual summer camp was to teach youth about climate change. And I don't think us necessarily in here, rather most youth, their knowledge about climate change is really just centered around it's getting hot and the oceans are rising, when it is truly so much more than that. So before I knew it, I was leading my own segments during the summer camp. I was creating my own production projects of videos and lessons that I would share with these youth like me. And most importantly, I was meeting new people. I didn't get to go to school for a year and a half because of the pandemic, and really getting to meet new people, like Bibi mentioned earlier, I got to meet her. It was exciting. I made new friends, some of who I still talk to today, some of who actually are in this room. And it was just a beautiful experience because I had the privilege to continue to grow the community that I felt a part of. But something began to feel off. And as the summer term ended, the executive director of the organization approached me and she asked if I wanted to be part of the budding fellowship program. And of course, I had fallen in love with this work. I'd fallen in love with meeting new people. And I said yes, so I became the volunteer coordination fellow. My job description's in the title. I coordinated our youth volunteers, which literally meant me meeting people through Zoom meetings every single day, and organizing events, and just reaching out to people, and really hearing their stories. And in the climate community, climate activism community, we like to call these our climate stories, which are just kind of our origin stories about how we got involved with the climate crisis. And like I said earlier, I kind of felt a little bit off more and more as the terms kind of started to change. I remember this one instance, we were in a meeting, and in Zoom, y'all remember how you had to put your school name under like your name if you were like in a group of different students from different schools? There was about 30 students, and I took a look at their names, and I saw La Jolla High, Point Loma High, Canyon Crest Academy, La Jolla High, Point Loma, with like maybe 3 schools from the South Bay, mine included. I go to Hilltop. And I realized that there was an issue. The majority of the population, or the demographic of students doing this necessary work that revolves around an issue that pretty much the hardest hit populations are BIPOC populations and low-income populations. The majority of them were from northern San Diego, and the majority of them were white. And I kind of felt a little bit alienated, never because of their actions or their speech. In fact, they never once directly said something or did something to make me feel isolated. Rather, simply existing in that space, I realized my story wasn't like theirs, and it was never going to be like theirs. So, being the volunteer coordination fellow, first order of business was I need to make sure we have numbers on par with the northern schools from the southern schools. You know, living in the South Bay, I knew it was a little bit more difficult to get students involved or a little bit interested. And I would spend my days sending emails, posts, flyers, announcements about our events, you know, all virtual events, obviously. And I got excited because I was thinking, you know what, this is like, I just need to send more. I just need to say it more. But as our events continued to, happen, I realized the populations I wanted to see an increase in weren't increasing. And so I was really disheartened, but also enlightened to the fact that a lot of the students in the South Bay couldn't afford the time or the resources to join us in on these events. I myself, I live in the South Bay. I've grown up in the South Bay, but I still have an enormous amount of privilege. And so I was lost. And I didn't really know who to talk to because the majority of my supervisors and my peers were also white northern students. And discussions sometimes felt quite surface level. But then I met the San Diego 350 Jedi intern, and we'll call her Jo. Jo helped me feel seen, like truly seen. It helped the fact that she was from a BIPOC community, but also, funnily enough, had attended Hilltop High. So it was like, definitely, this is my person, or this is like my close connection in the climate community that I've been looking for. And she helped me understand that it's not an easy journey getting these communities who are the hardest hit, the most impacted, to get them involved because sometimes they don't have the resources to get involved. And she helped me see my own privilege. Like I mentioned earlier, I come from a Latina background. It's a very important part of my identity. But I wouldn't directly feel the impacts of unclean water or food insecurity when a lot of these students would feel. And so being able to find that space, even if it was just one person, being welcomed with open arms and a wholesome heart, I felt truly seen. And I guess that's the purpose of today, of me being here today to share my story. Even if it was one person, that was all it took, I felt seen and heard and validated. And eventually, I was able to communicate this discomfort, these emotions, these goals of mine to my peers. And I explained to them that this is a very big issue in terms of our volunteers, and that we needed to do something about it. So then, San Diego 350 has always been a very inclusive space from its origin to now. But we began to see, a ramping up of the involvement and of the direct action. And one of the realizations of this ever-growing, overarching hope that we had was Youth v. Oil. And Youth v. Oil was a group of San Diego San Diego students. And when I mean San Diego, I mean northern San Diego to southern San Diego. So a lot more students once we were able to communicate the realities of this issue. And they got together, met with policy experts, met with each other, met with members of the communities that were directly affected by the issue of oil drilling, otherwise known as fracking, and created a resolution calling upon the Californian state government and specifically Californian Governor Gavin Newsom, to immediately cease all the issuings of fracking permits. And it wasn't an easy journey. I saw from the sidelines how much work it took, but also how inspiring it was to see a group of truly diverse volunteers and students, and really just members of a community, get together to protect the most vulnerable. And fortunately, the resolution that they created received support from over 1,500 students across San Diego, as well as support from over 500 students here in the Sweetwater Union High School District. The resolution was passed in the San Diego County Board of Education. It was passed in the San Diego Unified School District, and when I was fortunate enough to work a little bit more intimately, we passed it here in the Sweetwater Union High School District. And at the end of it, realizing that my discomfort, my unknowing of an environment that I had entered, it was necessary, or I realized it was necessary to later on be able to truly communicate the importance of fostering and cultivating a community that is open to all, and when I mean all, to ensure that we could protect the most vulnerable, especially at a time when they need it. And, San Diego 350 to this day has continued to grow. Teams like our Plastic-Free Gen Z and our South Bay Eco Justice team, they have continued to grow and really focus on projects and policy that centers on vulnerable communities, like BIPOC communities and low-income communities, so that at the end of it, we can ensure both an end to climate change and access to sustainable and equitable futures for unprotected communities that they have long deserved. Thank you.